Bibi Fahodie, Hotep, Jumbo African family, another great opportunity to discuss issues affecting the African world from our perspective. Once again, our brother Gullah Jack is still involved in some other activities that has him totally tied up. So hopefully he'll be back with us next week. He was trying to get back today, but some things didn't quite work out. As Brother almost said, we have a guest on our program returning for the second time, Brother Kwesi Michael Fisher, brother that actually met via his blog and social media, The Assault on Black Folks' Sanity. Must have been back in 2007 or somewhere in that neighborhood, Kwesi?
Yeah, it probably was 2000 more. That's when I closed it down.
Okay, maybe 2006 or somewhere.
2004, 2005, something like that.
Okay. So anyway, Brother Kwesi is a longtime activist in the struggle for the liberation and empowerment of African people. And we had a conversation about some current events and the development of this movement called ADOS, American Descendants of Slavery. But before we get to that, I just want to mention just a couple of things that have taken place this week. One, I think, is very positive. There's a new reparations lawsuit that has been filed in Tulsa on behalf of a 105-year-old elder mother who was actually a child when the white supremacy dynamic unleashed their barbarism in 1921. And this lawsuit, unlike the previous lawsuit, which everybody who understands reparations believed had a tremendous chance of winning because it met one of the criteria that our enemies already always thrown in our face, that is, there are no living descendants. When Charles Ogletree of Harvard filed the lawsuit, there were 150 survivors. This was, I think, in 2003. There were 150 survivors still living, direct survivors of the massacre. And that lawsuit was rejected. The Supreme Court refused to hear it, but it was rejected at the appellate level because they said the statute of limitations had expired. This lawsuit is based on Oklahoma law. It's been filed in state court, and it's called a public nuisance law. And it has no statute of limitations. And the state of Oklahoma actually used it against some pharmaceutical companies and won a lawsuit because of the effects of the opioid epidemic in Oklahoma. So they think that this lawsuit has a chance to proceed. We'll see whether it does or not. But the fact of the matter is, our historical enemies need to understand that the reparations issue is not going away. We're going to keep discussing it, keep demanding it, and pushing forward. The second thing, this past Friday marked 100 days. That would have been September the 4th, marked 100 days of consecutive demonstrations for justice for Breonna Taylor in Louisville. And I just have to give the people in the Louisville community who have protested for now 101 days as of yesterday, Kentucky Derby Day, and I'm sure they'll be out there again today. And they have, unlike some of the protests, they have maintained black grassroots leadership, even though there's some people of European descent involved, but it has been able to progress, and they've been able to keep a lot of the destructive forces out of from being a major factor in their demonstrations for Sister Breonna Taylor. And finally, there was a very tragic event in Bloomington, Minnesota, where a Neanderthal went berserk, killed his wife, and then proceeded to fire shots in the direction of two young sisters who were actually loading some items into a U-Haul. They had nothing to do with this. The guy killed his wife in a garage, he fired shots. He hit 12-year-old Michaela Salter in the head, and Michaela's 29-year-old sister was hit several times in the lower extremities. Both of them are still hospitalized. Obviously, Michaela's situation is much more desperate. But her sister, Carnicia, had a 1-year-old child, and Michaela shielded her niece, her 1-year-old niece, and took the bullet there. Once again, here you see our sisters just something just seems to be just instilled in a lot of our sisters, just carrying on the tradition of strong black women. And so we're going to post on our page a fundraiser. They have a GoFundMe page set up, I think, by their grandmother, and we're going to post it on the African Liberation Media Facebook page. Just a few items that wanted to discuss, because the bulk of the show, even though we may come back to some of those if brother Kwesi wants to, bulk of the show is going to be about the development of this movement called ADOS, African Descendants for Slavery, and particularly their attack on the Pan-African movement or on Pan-Africanism. And this has raised concerns in a lot of people who are driven by the notion that we have to have global African unity and organization in order to achieve true African liberation and empowerment. So, Brother Kwesi, why don't you tell us, what is this ADOS movement? You may want to talk about some of the history of Pan-Africanism, or what is it that actually raised your concerns about this?
Well, of course, as you mentioned, I've been involved, as so many other black folk, in trying to obtain justice in the face of this racism, a white supremacist system that exists throughout the world. It's not just a phenomenon that you have in the United States, and what you got to do is, in order to understand that, you got to go back in history. Now, ADOS is I don't know whether one can call it a movement yet, but it's becoming more influential from what I've seen. It's a concept that was started by two people, a woman in her, I believe in her early 40s, named Yvette Carnell. She has a blog, but it's a YouTube channel called Breaking Brown, and another gentleman named Antonio Moore. Yvette appears to be stationed located in Atlanta, and Antonio Moore, he's in Los Angeles. Apparently he's an attorney of some kind. From what I understand, he used to be working for the district attorney's office. I don't know whether that's correct. He has a YouTube channel called Tone Talks. All right. So a lot of people argue about, what their background is, whether they're rightist, leftist, Trumpist, or whatever. I don't think that's that relevant. I think what's important is that they're bringing to fore a lot of issues which are, traditional issues that we face in the African American community and in the African community as a whole. But they're doing it in a way to distort things. It's kind of misleading. Their basic premise is that that black people in the United States constitute their own community, which is correct. They say, however, that this community has become, while it derived from what they say is West Africa, which is not quite correct. We're actually, the plurality of us are from the Congo, and have been marched to West Africa, and then certain West African kings, renegade kings in cooperation with the Europeans, then brought us over here. But a lot of us that are West African as well. In any case, that we've become disconnected from Africa, period. And that we have to now define ourselves as a community and define ourselves as the product of American slavery, which is to an extent correct, because we are a product of that system as well. And that we really have nothing to do anymore with Africa. But that it is correct that we have to go and demand reparations for deprivations that we have suffered historically, not just during slavery, but also after the formal abolition of slavery, during Jim Crow, et cetera, up until today. They emphasize the fact that there is a wealth gap between the average African American and the average white American, European American, which is something that we've known for hundreds of years. And that wealth gap is extreme. It's been the same for the last 50, 60 years, if not more. And that is, it's about between 5 and 10 cents of every dollar that white folks have, we have 5 or 10 cents. So when we're talking about wealth, we're not talking about income like, salaries or something. We're talking about wealth in terms of owning housing, liquid assets, bank accounts, land, et cetera, et cetera. All this is absolutely correct. And to point that out is absolutely correct. And that it's not a function of black folk not wanting to work or not working, but a function of the system is absolutely correct too. In my personal opinion is it's like, okay, cool, even if we didn't want to work as black folk here in the United States, fine, we work for free for 400 years. Can we take a lunch break for 100 years? You know what I'm saying? So, all right, so all this is partially correct. The reparations part is correct. The wealth gap is correct. But then they go and they attack Pan-Africanism. And the attack is this. They've been focusing on Africans that have immigrated from various parts of Africa, Nigeria, et cetera, to the United States and say, look, these folks are doing better than the average African American, the African, what they call ADOS. They termed this new term ADOS for us. And they're trying to usurp, take over things that we as descendants of African slavery, American slavery, have initial right to. And they're trying to take over the reparation. They're trying to get the affirmative action for themselves, et cetera, et cetera. Then they go and extend that to the brothers and sisters from the Caribbean community that come over here. Say, okay, listen, you guys, you come over here too, and you're doing the same thing. All right. At the same time, what they do is they identify certain Africans or black folk from the Caribbean or Africa, those with the correct attitude, right? They identify as allies. So now you have, Jamaicans that are over here that work on behalf of African Americans. Let's say Kwame Ture that came from Trinidad. He's an ally. All of a sudden, he's an ally of so-called ADOS. You might have a Nigerian person from what's now Nigeria coming over here that's working on behalf of African Americans. He's an ally. So you have this separation. And then when you have some kind of unity, then there's unity as allies, but not unities as related peoples. All right. And they base all this on the history of African American black folk in this country. Okay. So what's happening now is that you have more and more folks saying, oh, They're kind of giving people the go ahead to attack these African immigrants, right? And they posit these African immigrants as representative of all of Africa, although they say, well, Africa is not, there is no real Africa as such. It's 54 countries. We have to understand that, and so many different ethnicities, etc. So, you can't really have a unified Africa. And then they read articles from different people that inside of Africa, for example, Zimbabwe, that are engaged in a struggle against ZANU, against Mugabe, who's a Pan-Africanist, right? And so they're citing articles from the opposition of that and saying, see, these Africans are saying there is no real Africa. There's no unity. So there's a lot of stuff going on that's distorted. All right. Now, there are many aspects to this whole thing, and there are many, consequences that flow out of it, political consequences in today's day. But it's important to unpack issue for issue. It's very significant that they attack Pan-Africanism. They have Yvette Carnell. Now, among the two, Yvette and Antonio Moore, you have a division of labor. Yvette Carnell is more of the political theorist. She's a very good speaker, but she's more like on a one-to-one thing. She kind of created the underlying political construct for this, from what I could see. Antonio Moore, when you look at his YouTube channel, he speaks more like a Baptist preacher. So he's very good in preaching. He preaches at you, so you're kind of in church with the brother. So they work very well together, right? And they've been able to influence a lot of people. Now, they've attacked Joy Reid, they've attacked other people, they've attacked Barack Obama, they've attacked, some of the attacks make sense. Some of them are skewed. Some of them, we don't know. Now, what my attitude is towards Barack Obama is similar to yours. Right. I think, I'm not happy with what he's been doing. And a lot of black folk don't. A lot of black men are disappointed, and they kind of hone in on that too. So any case. So now let's deal with the Pan-Africanism thing. I encourage everybody to go to Yvette Carnell's YouTube channel called Breaking Brown, and Google Pan-Africanism is Dead. That's a whole show that she did, I think about a year or two ago, I'm not sure. So why is she saying that Pan-Africanism is dead? First of all, she doesn't define Pan-Africanism correctly. Let's talk about Pan-Africanism first and foremost before people, before we go into this thing. If we go back, now we know that history isn't abstract. Everything that happened a year ago affects us today. Mm-hmm. Things that happened 10 years ago affect us today. Right. Things that happened 30 years ago affect us today, and it's going all the way back. Mm-hmm. So the start of African slavery, as the Supreme Court of the United States even termed it until the late 19th century, began officially in 1619. And it began as a project of the British colonial settlers, right? Mm-hmm. And it continued to be a project of Britain until here in the colonies until 1776, when the English that were settled here, that didn't want to continue their affiliation with Britain for a certain reason. I'll go into that reason in a second. Declared their independence in 1776, set up what then became the United States of America, and then continued slavery for another 89 years, official slavery, until 1865. So the bulk of the time that our people have been in bondage over here in the Americas has been under the British Empire. Okay?
Right.
Now, so that's important to understand. Now, my family was enslaved and comes from what we call South Carolina.
Mm-hmm.
All right, we were enslaved in Darlington County, South Carolina, and Georgia, but especially
Did you
South
say
Carolina.
Darlington?
Darlington County, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and we still get buried down there. So we might die in New York, we might die in California, but we tend to get transported back to South Carolina and get buried there. That has something to do with my great-great-grandfathers.
Right.
But I'll get into that later if need be. So we have to understand that for this, what is it, 140 years or something like that, we were, the bulk of the existence of slavery in the Americas was under the British Empire.
Mm-hmm.
And the British Empire didn't just maintain slavery here in these colonies, they also had a colony in Jamaica, they had colonies in Trinidad, they had colonies in Barbados. Barbados is extremely important. Barbados, before Haiti and anything else, was the most profitable slave entity in the British Empire. It's a small place, but they kept importing Africans, working them to death, kept importing Africans, working them to death. And Barbados became so profitable, but it's small, that the sons of the slave masters over there, slave owners, those concentration camp commandants, couldn't get more land. Like, the young, the way they inherited property was the eldest son would get all the property. They wouldn't divide the property up. So the second oldest and the third oldest, they were like out of it. So what they did is they came to the Carolinas, because we've got to remember, everything is one part of the same empire. Mm. They came to the Carolinas and set up Carolina, which later was divided into South Carolina and North Carolina.
Right.
In particular, Charleston. And they set up the system, the slavery system that they had in Barbados in South Carolina. Okay? So we had this, that was later, that was after 1619. In 1619, we had slavery set up in Virginia. Mm-hmm. Then we had one in South Carolina. There were two systems, kind of. The Virginia system was based on, we would need to grow tobacco, et cetera, which was, you didn't have big plantations, you had farms. So, we're going to bring in these Africans, we're going to buy them, but above all, we're going to breed them. Mm-hmm. The Barbadian system was, we're going to work these black folk to death and then import more. It's cheaper to import more than to breed them. Mm-hmm. All right? So when you had the independence struggle, right? It wasn't a revolution. It was really a struggle for independence from Britain. They had this big argument among the Virginia folks, like Thomas Jefferson, mm-hmm. and those in South Carolina. And the Virginia folks said, we're breeding our own,
Right. So they wanted to outlaw the transatlantic
slave trade, because this way they were going to make more money.
Right.
You see what I'm saying? The South Carolinians slave owners said, we just going to bring in all these Africans from South Carolina, from Africa. It's cheaper for us than to breed those guys.
Right.
And so they made a compromise and said, okay, what was it, 1808? Mm-hmm. slave trade is over, but for 25 years, we can do the international slave trade.
Right.
That didn't mean that the internal slave trade didn't stop. So,
Right.
you had the internal slave trade when that became extremely important after the Louisiana Purchase.
Mm-hmm.
When when Napoleon had to sell Louisiana to Thomas Jefferson because the Haitian Revolution had risen up and wiped out the army
Right.
that Napoleon had actually been designated to protect his interests in Louisiana.
Right.
But they
And
diverted.
when you say Louisiana territory, you're just not talking about the state of Louisiana. You're talking about territory that extends from the Gulf of Mexico to the Pacific Ocean.
Yeah, no, not really. It extends more northwards, all the way to the Canadian border.
Yeah, well, I thought part of it covered part of Oregon, but go ahead.
Yeah,
That's okay.
No, they did, but
Okay.
yeah, but you got to also remember there's Mexico, right?
Yeah.
Which we took.
Okay.
But we're talking about Louisiana. I mean, we're talking about Louisiana, Arkansas, I believe, all these,
Yeah, Missouri and Colorado.
Missouri, yeah. Well, Colorado was part of Mexico, but these were gigantic territories,
Mm-hmm.
right? The other thing, by the way, that the British had told the colonists was, listen, you can't extend your settlement and slavery beyond the Appalachians. And they're like, no, we need that, okay, for ourselves. All right, so after Thomas Jefferson made this purchase, they needed this was all wooded area, forests, fertile forest, but, they wanted to clear it. And they needed, the cotton had become more and more important. In order to do that, they had to bring in more and more Africans. Mm-hmm. So in South Carolina, they imported all these Africans, brought them, and marched them off to not just South Carolina, not just Georgia, but onto these new territories. And after the international slave trade was made illegal, 1808, then the Virginians started exporting their quote unquote product, right,
mm-hmm.
to those areas. There were two ways they did it. They used slave ships, where they, shipped them all the way down to the port of New Orleans, and then from New Orleans they would be taken up to Natchez, to the crossroads up there. Or what they would do is they would put together what they call coffles, which they had in Africa as well. They chained dozens and 100 Africans together, black folk together, and marched them thousands of miles. They sold them, marched them thousands of miles to Georgia, and from Georgia to, what's now Tennessee, Mississippi, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, particularly after the invention of the cotton gin. Let me correct myself. My geography was off. You are correct. The states were what we now parts of, or all of, Louisiana, Arkansas, Oklahoma, Missouri, Kansas, about a quarter maybe of Colorado, Nebraska, Iowa, parts of Minnesota, North Dakota, South Dakota, Wyoming, Montana, and into Canada. And I was wrong about Oregon. So you're right. This large swath of land was controlled by France, which Napoleon was forced to sell as a result of the successful revolution in Haiti. I just wanted to clarify that, because when I make a mistake, I want to make sure people understand we correct things. But go ahead, brother, regarding the actions of Jefferson and et cetera, right. Slave breeding and internal trade.
So now what we have to understand is that we didn't have blank robots that were caught in Africa, brought over here. These were people, our ancestors were people with cultures, with thought processes, with ways of doing things. Some of us were Igbo, a lot of us were Bakongo, some of us were Bateke, some of us were, they even brought in people from Mozambique. Then they ended up bringing in Akan. A lot of the Akans ended up in Jamaica, by the way. Then they brought in, people from They brought in Ovimbundu. They brought in, then they brought in Wolof and Mandinka, less actually than Bakongo, etc. And all these people were people that had mindsets, that had cultures. What is culture? Culture is how you do things, how you interpret things, how you speak, etc. Right? And in that, under the system under this oppressive system, it was like a cauldron. They were kept separate, but they were intermingled, and they intermingled. And in that cauldron, they developed a new culture over the years. Okay. But it's still an African culture. You see what I'm saying? They took parts of European culture because they had to. But as such, what happened was that a new nation, cultural entity was forged under these oppressive conditions in the in what later became the United States. So this entity, these folks call ADOS. Well, we've always recognized that there is a separate African community in the United States. We're no less Africans than any African in Africa, just because they stayed behind. None of us said, oh, like the Europeans said, well, I'm tired of Ireland, Ireland is, or Germany is, it's too reactionary for me, so I will come over here now and become American, and I cut my ties with Germany, Or take Trump's grandfather, right? Trump's grandfather came to the United States to escape the draft in Germany.
Right.
Then when he went back to Germany, the Germans said, yo.
You done, buddy. You out of here.
Go on back there. So they're like, okay, cool. You see what I'm
saying? Too bad they didn't keep him. But
right. So none of us turned our backs to our families. It's not like, okay, there was a black dude or a black woman standing in the savannah, just standing around, and then they snatched them up.
Right.
What happened was people invaded villages. They disrupted families. They killed people.
Yeah, it was the world's children. The world's largest forced migration. And a point I always make, because people, when we talk about, the 1619, one of the arguments that they make, they'll say, well, they weren't slaves, they were indentured servants, of course. And as you just explained, nobody in Africa signed a contract to leave Angola, Congo, or wherever, and come to the United States to work for 7 to 10 years to work off some kind of debt, as people were doing in Europe. People in Europe, in England in particular, were motivated by massive unemployment, extremely high rates of crime, and unemployment, right? High rates of poverty. So they had motivations. Nobody in Africa was motivated to leave Africa for any reason to get on a boat and come to the United States. So this is part of the process of what you were talking about, and it's important in terms of this argument to understand the years of chattel slavery under British colonial North America, which then became the United States of America after their successful War of Independence and the Treaty of Paris, which was signed in 1783. But go ahead, brother.
All right. So now what we have is at least two white entities, the United States government and the British government, that lorded over us and maintained slavery. Okay? ADOS concentrates on the U.S. government only.
Right.
All right. And ADOS says, okay, the U.S. government owes us reparations. And to the extent that the British owe us reparations, they do acknowledge that, the Brits, maintained this system since 1619 until 1776. The United States government should go and collect the reparations for us. Okay? And kind of take them to court. It's on their website. Wow. Now, but not only that, but they demand reparations from the African countries.
What?
Well, there's a point. Hold on, there's a point. For example, they cite the Dahomians. The Dahomian king was a gangster,
Yeah.
all right? Was today Benin. The king, right there, trained a whole bunch of sisters called the Dahomian Amazons, and what they did is they would invade neighboring neighboring areas, kill people, snatch them up, and sell them to the Europeans, to the Americans, to the British, etc. A lot of people over there are still proud of, a lot of these descendants of these people are still proud of that, you know?
Okay.
Should they pay reparations? Sure. They can pay reparations if they got any money, right? They shouldn't get any, but hey. But the bulk of the African people in Africa, well, I'll deal with that later, weren't engaged in the slave trade. They were victims of the slave trade.
Okay.
So they're saying, okay, these African countries, they're saying there's 54 of them, right? They are now, you know, they need to pay reparations to us, to at least the West African ones. And the United States needs to collect that from these countries on our behalf. Right? Okay. Now, what they don't tell people is that these African countries are European created entities.
Yeah, none of these countries existed in 1619.
Well, not even that. They didn't exist until, you know, about 40 years ago, 50 years ago, with the possible exception of Ethiopia. But even Ethiopia's borders were basically defined by the Europeans. There's not a single country, quote unquote, in Africa that is an African country. The borders were all, you know, drawn
Created
by Europeans.
At the Berlin Conference, 1884, 1885.
South Africa is not an African country. You know, it's a European country. Kenya is a European country. Nigeria is a European country.
You're talking about their geographical boundaries.
Not only that, the judicial system that Nigeria has, the political system, everything has been imported from the UK.
Okay.
Right? There's nothing indigenous about that. I never heard of an African president, African parliament, no rules of whatever. And if you look at the judges, even in Zimbabwe, and I don't know if I understood Mugabe for that, they got judges sitting there with black judges with these wigs,
European
wigs looking ridiculous. Right?
In fact, they order them from the UK.
Well,
there's a place in the UK that produces these wigs, and they are sold to, you know, to Africans, judges to wear in Nigeria and Ghana and Zimbabwe and Kenya and so forth.
Right. So what you have in Africa is you have a situation where, okay, but come back. So we're dealing with at least two white entities. Now, the English and the Americans weren't the only ones engaged in the African slave trade, by far. The Dutch were engaged in it. The Germans were engaged in it. The Portuguese pioneered it. The Spanish were engaged in it. The bulk of Africans exported, quote unquote, kidnapped and taken to the Americas went to Brazil.
Right.
Okay. Also, Yorubas, Bakongos, etc., etc. So, now the thing about the Europeans is Europeans hate each other. The French and the Germans, they fought each other forever. They called themselves, you know, the Germans, you know, were, even though originally they were one people. Okay. The France, the word France comes from Franken, originally the word Franken, which was a Germanic people, right? And they were just divided. They were divided when one of their emperors, you know, died. He had three sons, so they divided the empire into three entities. One of them, which became France. Okay. And they've been fighting each other forever. The Europeans killed more Europeans than they killed anybody else.
Exactly.
First World War, Second World War, everything else.
Mm-hmm.
So they're like, at each other's throats all the time. But when it came to dealing with Africa, all of a sudden they united.
They're
See what I'm
unified.
saying? All
Mm-hmm.
right. So you have a pan-Europeanism in relation to how to deal with Africa.
Mm-hmm.
Now they might fight each other over, oh, I want to get this part of Africa, I want to get that part of Africa, I want to get this part of African bodies, I want to get that part of African bodies. Oh, you Portuguese, you're still exporting African bodies to Brazil. No, 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 you shouldn't do that, say the British,
Mm-hmm.
because we stopped it, so you guys got to stop it. The
Right.
Portuguese are saying, are you out your mind? But at the end of the day, they're still brothers and sisters. See what
Right.
I'm saying?
Right.
Okay. So what you have, this pan-Europeanism with respect to African people, is called white supremacy and exists on a global scale. See what I'm saying?
Gotcha.
Pan-Africanism is nothing but a logical political reaction to that. If my oppressor functions on a global scale, I got to function on a global scale. See what I'm saying?
In order to defeat him.
In order to defeat him, in order to defend myself.
Right.
Now, I know that an Igbo is not the same as a Kikuyu.
Right.
I know that Xhosa is not the same as a Zulu or a Tswana or whatever. We know that there are thousands of African languages,
Mm-hmm.
thousands of communities that are separate from each other, that even fought each other. They didn't kill each other off the way the Europeans killed each other off. But yes, there's gang wars. There's, just like we got the Bloods and the Crips. That doesn't make the Bloods less African American or the Crips less African American.
Well, I mean, all of this is a result of European domination, though, right?
Well, yeah, some of it, but
Yeah.
a lot of it, in terms of the disparate different African communities, yeah, and even if they were at war with each other forever without white folks involved, once the white folks got involved and took over and imposed their power structure on everybody, we all became one tribe. Now, you might be thinking that you're a Xhosa, you might be thinking that you're African American, you might be thinking that I'm a Jamaican, hey, or you might think that you're a Trinidadian. But from the point of view of white supremacy, there's only one tribe.
Right.
That tribe is called niggers. All right? All right. So we have to understand that. Now, as an African community over here, there are two things. We were forcibly removed from Africa. Our families were destroyed. There were families left behind that lost their sons, their daughters,
Mm-hmm.
their mothers. What happens here today if somebody goes, let's say a cop, unjustifiably shoots a black person or any
Mm-hmm.
person, right?
Right.
What do? You go, the person is dead. What does the family do? The family goes and sues the city. Sometimes they win, sometimes they don't. And they get a settlement of $1 million or a few $1,000s or even $2 million or whatever. All right? That goes to the family. Now, if I'm sitting in the middle of the Congo and some people on behest of Europeans that want to buy people come in, invade my village, and kill off my father and brother or uncle and mother because they're too old, and they snatch the young people, the strongest people, march them for thousands of miles to the coast, let them linger for months in dungeons, and then bring them over to the Americas. Does that mean I was left behind? I lost my family.
Mm-hmm.
Can I sue, please, and get made whole for losing my family? That's an issue wholly separate from what happened to the victims themselves. Now, the victim himself, right,
Mm-hmm.
or herself, says, I need reparations too. So both both folks need to be restored. Reparations mean being made whole.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So when you say that reparations are due only to Africans in the United States, black folk in the United States, and not to those families that were robbed of their people, right?
Mm-hmm.
What you're saying is that those people that were robbed, our uncles and aunts or great aunts, or great great aunts, weren't people. You see what I'm saying? They don't have rights. They don't have the right to have their families restored. See, you can't separate. Yes, we need reparations in the United States. We need reparations in Jamaica. We need reparations in Africa. Why? Because this was a worldwide phenomenon. And all of these crooks, it's not just that one mafia family got involved.
Mm-hmm.
It was a whole commission.
Right.
You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
They might have mafia wars among each other, but
Right.
as a whole, they institute that stuff. So yeah, we go to the U.S. government and say, yo, we want reparations. And to the British, Queen Elizabeth, the reason that you're so rich is because your ancestor, Queen Elizabeth II, actually Queen Elizabeth is not, ancestor is German from Hanover. So, but British, Queen Elizabeth I, you commissioned that African slave trade.
Right.
Okay? Y'all got rich off of that. We want our money. We want not just our money, we want our names back. We want our restoration. Okay, now the Jamaicans say, but hey, hold on. The British colonized us too. The British enslaved us too. Exactly. We were all in the same pot. Now the British, quote unquote, freed you in 1832, and the Americans, 33 years later, quote unquote, but basically we were the same.
Right.
It's the same thing. So you cannot go and separate this. And it's good. And once you understand that, then you understand that, okay, there has to be unity among everybody in order to fight back against what's going on.
Okay.
Now the white supremacy didn't stop once there was emancipation of Africans in Jamaica or throughout the British Empire in 1832. It didn't stop once there was emancipation in the United States in 1865. And the Brazilian brothers and sisters, they didn't get emancipated until I think it was 1889.
88, I think.
Or 88.
Mm-hmm.
So they were the last ones. And they're the bulk of the African population, black population in the Americas.
Yeah.
There's more of them in Brazil than anywhere else in the Americas.
Right.
Okay. So after that, what we had practices that were akin to slavery in all these places.
Mm-hmm.
Now in Jamaica, they might have had, because they had a majority of Jamaicans on this little island, and in Barbados or whatever, they might have had black constables and black this and black that and black the other. But when it came down to brass tacks, who said what's going on, who owned the resources, who controlled everything, was these white folks. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah. Let me ask you this. I don't want to jump ahead of where you're going.
Right.
But what do you think motivated this attack? So you had two people that concocted or came up with this idea. I think they changed the names of it. I think it was one time American descendants of slavery, and then they said descendants of slaves or whatever. This attempt to create this new identity. But what do you think motivated the attack on the concept of Pan-Africanism, and which was really, in my opinion, an attack on the whole idea of global African unity? What what do you think motivated that? Why did they choose that? Because both of us have experience in the Black liberation movement, and when Pan-Africanism, the idea was at reached a second height after the Garvey movement, in the 1970s and into parts of the 1980s, where we were really focused on global African unity here in the United States. Compared to now, I mean, I really don't see that type of movement. What do you think motivated them in 2016? Based on the article you sent me from the sister, Jessica, I can't pronounce her last name, but anyway, what do you think motivated Carnell and Moore? Well, Carnell is the ideologue, so what do you think motivated her to attack Pan-Africanism?
All right, I'll tell you what I think. That's an opinion in a minute, but let me just finish another thing about Pan-Africanism before we go into that.
Okay.
So what we have is we have to have a global unity in order to fight this.
Right.
The other thing is, none of us ever said, hey, we're leaving Africa, voluntarily. We already established that. That means that we still have a claim to Africa, regardless of what the Africans that were left behind say or not. For example, if I go and I steal your house or I steal your car, right? And you don't see your car for 20 years, and then you die, but you want to leave your car to your children, right? Or your house to your children, and they don't see it, right? Does that mean that all of a sudden you don't have a claim? Your children don't have a claim on the property that you put together? Mm-hmm. Don't you want to leave something to your grandchildren or even your great-grandchildren? Just because I was able to keep them away from that, I was able to keep the property somewhere hidden, let's say, does that mean that they lose their claim to that property? Now, if you had walked away from the property voluntarily, like the Europeans did, that's one thing. Well, we never moved away from that. So Pan-Africanism doesn't just mean that we unite. Pan-Africanism also means that we, as Africans in this country, as descendants of Africans that were forcibly removed, have a right, whether some so-called Nigerian says yes or no, or Congolese says yes or no, or whatever, to Africa. Africa is big enough. That's not just something where, they can let us. It's ours. It's like Africa itself is theirs, that the Africans that were left in Africa. So it is those Africans that are in Brazil, that are in the Caribbean, and that are in the United States. Mm. And those of us that built up the United States and Brazil, et cetera, also have an additional claim to the United States. But so do the people that were robbed of their resources, the families that were left behind in Africa, that were robbed of their children, of the primary resource that any people has, namely people, mm-hmm. and whose children then were used to build up this foreign entity rather than their own society.
Okay.
You see what I'm saying?
Yeah. So
they have a claim to our labor as well, because we're all one family.
Okay.
See how that makes sense?
Yeah, it makes sense.
So when you say, Pan-Africanism is dead because we're not connected with Africa anymore, that means we're giving up a lot of property. We're giving up our chance to, you can't build a nation on air. You have to have land. Like Brother Malcolm said, land. Every land is the basis of any kind of revolution, of any kind of building of society. You can't, it's impossible. So it's not an abstract concept that Africans in the United States or Black folk in the United States have a right to Africa. We do. And it doesn't matter whether some African government that was set up by European constructs, may they call themselves Nigeria or Ghana or whatever, tell us, oh, you guys, you should come back. It's a year of return. It's not up to you to allow us to return. You see what I'm saying? We have a right to go anywhere. Now, the ADOS people criticize, these folks. Oh yeah, they want to make tourism industry out of us. True, but you have to understand who these governments are. They're not authentic African governments. They were set up by the Europeans. That's all there's to it.
Right.
When these guys that are president of this or that or the other say, "Oh, come on back," they're not talking about the average brother in the street, brother and sister in the street. They ain't got shit. They're talking about we want doctors, we want
Engineers,
we want engineers, et cetera, et cetera. Well, we need them engineers over here. I had a conversation with a brother from South Africa just a few days ago, right? That was here a long time, who is a Pan-Africanist to the core, and has been in it's a scion of a important South African Pan-Africanist figure, right? And I said, we had a conversation. He said, "Oh yeah, listen, they took our best and brightest and took them to the Americas. We need you to come back and help build us up." I said, "Okay, cool. We'll come back, but my job is, above all, to take care of my people over here. Your job is to take care of people over there, and we do it in unity, and we travel back and forth. And yeah, we'll send our skills over there, But that's a tactical question. All right, so when you divorce yourself from Pan-Africanism, you divorce yourself from your most effective way to fight global white supremacy, global white supremacy takes different forms in different countries, tactical forms, but strategically they all work together, right? And not just the so-called West that goes for the former Soviet Union, that goes for today's Russia, that goes for all that, okay? For the et cetera, et cetera. And it gives up the claim, the actual physical claim of our right to our homeland.
Okay.
You see what I'm saying? To our wealth. That gold belongs to Africans in Africa and the Africans in the diaspora. That bauxite, that coltran, all that. It belongs to all of us. All right? Okay, cool. So, to answer your question, what motivates them? I'm not sure, because I can't look into their heads. All I can do is I can look at what they're saying and what effect it has on the struggle.
Okay.
And at the interest and on the advancement of the struggle. And in whose interest eventually that plays out. So if you go and attack Pan-Africanism and you attack the unity of African folks, right? Which is the only strategic way of doing this thing. There is no logical other way to do it. Then you're weakening that struggle and you're helping white supremacy.
Right.
Okay?
Right.
So whether they're doing it because they're ignorant of history, or because they get paid off, or because they just handkerchief Negroes, or because, I don't know. Maybe they're very honest about what they want to do. Maybe they really want to do something for Africans, for African Americans, for Black people, however. And they see that the way to do it. It may be, I don't know. But what you have to do is you have to go look objectively at what history told you, not only that, but what the current conditions are, and then put that into context and develop a strategy. That strategy ain't going to work. Now, we know, I want to talk, now they one of the things that they do, which I find very suspicious, is that they exacerbate the difference between different Black people throughout the world.
Right.
So they talk about the Nigerians that come over here and they have, a larger amount of wealth than the average African American. Well, yes, it takes money to get on the plane and fly to the United States and establish yourself.
Right.
The average Nigerian doesn't have that kind of money.
Right.
It's a certain elite that has money.
That's right.
Certain elites that get educated in European schools or whatever. All right. So as an immigrant by itself already, you have the selection process. Okay. As each African American on the street still got more wealth than the average Nigerian. Okay. Or the average Gambian, or the average Gabonese, or Congolese, or whatever. Okay. So it's a false comparison. Now, there are contradictions among us. Listen, personally, I was married to a Jamaican.
Okay.
Oof, that's a difference in culture, right?
Okay.
All right. But that doesn't mean that I reject them and say, oh, y'all are not part of us. No. We're all family. Now, there might be a cousin that you have that you can't stand. In fact, you might be able to stand your sister, right? Because of whatever. But those are contradictions among family.
Yeah.
Not among enemies.
Right.
Sometimes those contradictions get so emotional that, you end up hitting each other, killing each other, or whatever, right? Just like the Bloods and the Crips, right? But those are contradictions among each other that we have to resolve by talking about. Okay? We can't have situations where people from the United States, Africans from the United States, go to South Africa and start lording it over Africans in South Africa.
Right.
We can't have that situation. We also can't have that situation where, Africans from Nigeria come over here and start trying to lord it over Africans in the United States. No. But these things we have to talk about. We can't resolve them by denigrating each other and, being violent against you or calling each other's names or whatever else. Because our true enemy is not. The Nigerian can't do nothing to me.
Yeah.
Right? It's the white supremacy. That's our true enemy. That's all of our. And as long as we understand that is the fundamental contradiction, not what's going on between us and the family, then we know what's going on. So, and that's what ADOS is not doing. ADOS is talking about white supremacy. Yeah, white supremacy, American white supremacy. And each one of you guys in Jamaica and Africa and so on, you all got your own white supremacy. But they don't make that connection. And you guys, you want to work with your white supremacies. In fact, recently they put some kind of post up saying that, the diaspora, this is what Yvette Cornell said, the diaspora is sucking up to white folks, meaning everybody outside the United States is now the diaspora, right? So you're sucking up to your own white supremacists. You see what I'm saying? So they're compartmentalizing everything. They're splintering the struggle. Now the fact is that there are areas in Africa where folks are behind the struggle, further behind than we are, where they do dumb shit like, bleaching their skin, putting blue eyes on there, worshiping, I don't know who, and some European gods, et cetera, et cetera. That's because they haven't had the direct experience dealing with white folks and white supremacy as we have had here in the United States.
Right.
This is the focal point of white supremacy. The South Africans had it to an extent, but not like we did. Okay? So we just explained to them what we went through, and we tried to make those connections. And in fact, we did, going back over 100 years. The progenitor of Pan-Africanism is not Marcus Garvey. It's Martin Delany. Martin Delany went African, African American, they put together commissions in Chicago, the Free Africans, before slavery was even officially ended in the United States,
Right.
and sent commissions over to Africa, not as part of the American Colonization Society
Right.
from these white folks,
Yeah.
but black folks, and made treaties with different African leaders to set up areas where Africans could come back,
Right.
right? And before that, it was David Walker and all these people. So, and this communication went back and forth. And that's the other thing people have to understand. There was never a disruption of the communication with Africans in the continent and Africans in the United States. There was always a back and forth.
Mm-hmm.
It might have been a trickle, but it was enough.
Right.
In fact, it was such enough that when Africans in Haiti rebelled and overthrew the white supremacists here, the biggest fear that the South Carolina, that the plantation owners, these concentration camp commandants had, was that the Haitian revolution would influence our people over here,
Right.
because they knew that we were in communication with the Haitians.
Right.
How we did it, they don't know, but we were people. We ain't stupid.
Right.
Okay. So just the same way we still communicated with Africa back and forth. There was a trickle, whatever. Then McVitie, where he come from?
Haiti. Well, St. Thomas and Haiti.
All right. So there was a constant influx. So you cannot say that you cannot isolate black folk in the United States from everybody else.
Mm-hmm.
That's the main problem with ADOS.
Right.
Okay. Now in today's political atmosphere, that has consequences as well. You have this contest between the Trumpists and Trump and Biden, Kamala Harris, et cetera, et cetera. So they attack Kamala Harris. They attack on the basis that she has an Indian mother and a Jamaican father, so she's not pure ADOS. That's what
Right.
Tell you the truth, who cares? What I care about is what is her political agenda. So if you're Nigerian, you come over here and you go, I want reparations for my people in the United States, in Nigeria, everyone else. I want to fight white supremacy. I'm down for you. I don't care. Go ahead.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're somebody, let's say your initials are AS,
Mm-hmm.
and you're from Brooklyn, from New York, right? And you've been running this, and you run for president or vice president, and you're pure quote unquote ADOS, meaning African American,
Mm-hmm.
and you don't go and implement that struggle. You don't talk about we need to be repaired, right? Well, then I got a problem with you. I don't care what your lineage is and so far.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So, two things. Reparations are due to each and every African descended person on the planet. And how it's implemented in each area is a different thing.
Right.
So that's out of the way. We have to have unity overall, and we can't denigrate each other, even though we understand we have strong differences, sometimes based on culture, sometimes based on being told by Europeans that you're better, Nigger than another, right? We had that in slavery time too. Oh, my master, he's nice, he's bigger than your master.
Mm-hmm.
You see what I'm saying? We had that. I think Dr. Du Bois talks about that. All right? So, no, we got to get away from that mind thing and just keep talking. Keep talking. Keep exchanging. But we can't exacerbate those differences based on some emotional, I don't like you. No. Okay? So, and as long as we do that, We strengthen these racists. And it's a very sophisticated way of diverting the struggle. That's why I'm bringing it up, because initially I said, listen, we should just forget about those guys and keep doing our work.
Right.
Right. Well, it's gotten to a point where I think they're starting to influence significant amounts, enough folks in the African community, Black American community, Black community, and confusing people, that's becoming dangerous. So it's time for us to start talking about it.
Okay.
Now, one of the things, of course, is that they say, well, Pan-Africanists they're not there anymore. That's not true. I haven't publicly said anything in years. Most of us just said we tend to get killed if we rise too much and talk. So let's just do our work. There's Pan-Africanists all over the world, all of them doing their work. So the question is going to be, well, what did you accomplish? We accomplished a lot. You don't know it because we don't talk about it.
Exactly.
Take public enemy, just on a more obvious scale. Take Public Enemy. Public Enemy is a Pan-Africanist project. It influenced the whole world. It changed things. It engendered a reaction from white supremacy in the form of gangster rap and all that other stuff.
Right. Because they talked about a black planet, right? Not just Black America.
You're a black planet. You see what I'm saying? So what we did, a lot of us, we went into entertainment industry, inspired by the Black poets, for example. We went into commerce. There's folks all over the place, but they don't talk about it. But these two folks, they ain't got no history. They have no history, right? They're popping up on YouTube and confusing everybody else.
Right.
It's getting to a point where some of their followers are starting to attack people. They're attacking.
I think that's their modus operandi.
They're starting to
that's how they get more followers.
Well, it's not just that, but when you start having your people start attacking people, you can always say, well, I didn't have nothing to do with it. But you're starting to use language like, for example, Yvette Carnell starts using language for like, you got to get out of the way. That's what she says. Joy Reid, you got to get out the way. So-and-so, you got to get out the way of us. You're an impediment to our liberation. You got to get out the way. What does that mean? How will people interpret that? Some crazy is going to go and say, yeah, let's get rid of this chick. Just like there was some guy named called himself Africa, that attacked a brother in Newark, some preacher, right? That wasn't necessarily Pan-Africanist or whatever.
Right.
You don't go and attack Black folk. You don't. One of the basic tenets of Pan-Africanism is don't harm Black people, don't lie to Black people, don't steal from Black people. That don't mean that people don't do it, but those are the tenets. I don't care whether you are Roy Innis. I'm not going to go and attack you physically.
Right. So let me we're running short on time, Brother Kwesi. So let me just say, so basically, if I understood, the gist of your argument, this organization is wittingly or unwittingly working in the interests of our historical enemies, the global white supremacy dynamic, by creating these divisions. And it's incumbent upon us to use all of our platforms to expose this and teach our people the true history of African people, including the numerous examples of global African unity that have worked in the interest of, the total liberation and empowerment of African people wherever we are. That's the gist of what I got from what you're saying.
Right. That's absolutely it. And in order to do that, we have to educate. And one of the problems that we've done, it's not, as Pan-Africanists have had, we have not done what we're supposed to have done. We haven't really gone out there and try to educate our people. Mm-hmm. Now you got these guys like, those YouTube phenomenon like Tariq Nasheed, who's he's got a variation of that ADOS thing. They call it Foundational Black Americans.
Right.
You got Umar Johnson. You got, it's not up to me to say what they're doing is correct or not correct. But what we have to do is we have to be more present. We have to be more engaged in letting people know what's really going on. You know?
Right. And we need to follow the examples of, Garvey, Kwame Ture, John Henry Clark, Francis Cress Welsing, et cetera.
Especially John Henry Clark.
Right.
You see what I'm saying? John Henry Clark was my teacher, one of my teachers, actually the most significant one. And I love that man. Right. And one thing that he's always said, that we have to understand, Black people, African people, have no friends. If you want to have a friend, go look in the mirror. That means, yes, we may have white people that help us out. That's great. In my business, I've had a lot of white folks help me out. Cool, great, because that's where the resources are, and I accepted those resources, right? But at the end of the day, the only thing that we know, the only people we know have an interest in Africans, in Black people, are Black people, because all over the world, they face the same oppression, just in different forms.
Right.
Sometimes directly, sometimes indirectly, right? And we have to unite and look in the mirror, and we can't do that by disparaging each other. That's shattering the mirror.
Exactly.
You know what I'm saying?
Exactly.
That's basically what I have to say on this one right now.
Okay, Brother Kwesi, we certainly appreciate you bringing this information to the African Liberation Media family. Yeah, we'll get this. Brother Amos will do his thing with our IT and technology and get this information published and out there. And we appreciate you joining us, and we'll look forward to talking to you again. Once again, this has been the African Liberation Media. Bibi Fahodier, Black Power, African Liberation. We shall conquer without a doubt. Ashe.
Power or the lack of power. I want to repeat this. Power or the lack of power. If your education in this institution